Welcome to my humble abode, darlings. Come in out of the rain and get comfortable. I have a story to tell you, and I hope you enjoy. If you do, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Threat by Saki. Sir Lulworth Quain sat in the lounge of his favorite restaurant, the Gallus Bankivia, discussing the weaknesses of the world with his nephew, who had lately returned from a much-enlivened exile in the wilds of Mexico. It was that blessed season of the year when the asparagus and plover eggs are abroad in the land, and the oysters has not withdrawn into its summer entrenchment. And Sir Lulworth and his nephew were in that enlightened after-dinner mood, when politics are seen in their right perspective, even the politics of Mexico. "Most of the revolution that takes place in this country nowadays," said Sir Lulworth, "are the product of moments of legislative panic. Take, for instance, one of the most dramatic reforms that had been carried through Parliament in the lifetime of this generation. It happened shortly after the coal strike of unblessed memory. To you, who have been plunged up to the neck in events of more tangled and tumbled description, the things I am going to tell you may seem of secondary interest. But after all, we had to live in the midst of them." Sir Lulworth interrupted himself for a moment to say a few kind words to the liquor brandy he had just tasted, and then resumed his narrative. "Whether one sympathizes with the agitation for female suffrage or not, one has to admit that its promoters showed tireless energy and considerable enterprise, and devising and putting into action new methods for accomplishing their ends. As a rule, they were a nuisance and a weariness to the flesh, but there were times when they verged on the picturesque. There was the famous occasion when they enlivened and diversified the customary pageantry of the royal progress to open Parliament by letting loose thousands of parrots, which had been carefully trained to scream 'Votes for Women,' in which circled around His Majesty's coach in a clamorous cloud of green and grey and scarlet. It was rather a striking episode from the spectacular point of view. Unfortunately, however, for its devisers, the secret of their intentions had not been well kept, and their opponents let loose at the same moment a rival swarm of parrots, which screeched, 'I don't think,' and other hostile cries, thereby robbing the demonstration of the unanimity which alone could have made it politically impressive. In the process of recapture, the birds learned a quantity of additional languages which unfit them for further service in the suffrage cause. Some of the green ones were secured by ardent Home Rule propagandists and trained to disturb the serenity of orange meetings by pessimistic reflections on Sir Edward Carson's destination in the life to come. In fact, the birds in politics is a factor that seems to have come to stay. Quite recently, at a political gathering held in some dimly lit place of worship, the congregation gave a respectful hearing for nearly 10 minutes to a jackdaw from Wapping, under the impression they were listening to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was late in arriving. "But the suffragettes," interrupted the nephew, "what did they do next?" "Oh, after the bird fiasco," said Sir Lulworth, "the militant section made a demonstration of a more aggressive nature. They assembled in force on the opening day of the Royal Academy exhibition, and destroyed some 300 or 400 of the pictures. This proved an even worse failure than the parrot business. Everyone agreed that there was always far too many pictures in the Academy exhibition, and the drastic weeding out of a few hundred canvases was regarded as a positive improvement. Moreover, from the artist's point of view, it was realized that the outrage constituted a sort of compensation for those whose work were persistently skied, since out of sight also meant out of reach. Altogether, it was one of the most unsuccessful and popular exhibitions that the Academy had held for many years. Then the fair agitators fell back on some of their early methods. They wrote sweetly argumentative plays to prove that they ought to have the vote. They smashed windows to show that they must have the vote, and they kicked cabinet ministers to demonstrate that they'd better have the vote. And still the coldly reasoned, or unreasoned reply was that they had better not. Their plight might have been summed up in a perverse of Gilbert's line: 20 voteless millions we, voteless against our will. 20 years hence we shall be 20 less voters still. And of course the idea for the masterstroke of strategy came from a masculine source. Lena Dubarry, who was one of the captain generals of their thinking department, met Waldo Orpington in the mall one afternoon, just at a time when the fortunes of the cause were at their lowest ebb. Waldo Orpington is a frivolous little fool who chirps at drawing-room concerts and can recognize bits from different composers without referring to the program. But all the same, he occasionally has ideas. He didn't care a two-penny fiddle string about the cause, but he rather enjoyed the idea of having his finger in the political pie. Also, it is possible, though I should think highly improbable, that he admired Lena Dubarry. Anyhow, when Lena gave a rather gloomy account of the existing state of things in the suffragette world, Waldo was not merely sympathetic, but ready with a practical suggestion. Turning his gaze westward along the mall, towards the setting sun in Buckingham Palace, he was silent for a moment and then said significantly, "You have to expand your energies and enterprises on labors of destruction. Why has it never occurred to you to attempt something far more terrific?" "What do you mean?" she asked him eagerly. "Create." "Do you mean create disturbances? We've been doing nothing else for months," she said. Waldo shook his head and continued to look westward along the mall. He's rather good at acting in an amateur sort of fashion. Lena followed his gaze and turned to him with a puzzled look of inquiry. "Exactly," said Waldo, in answer to his look. "But how can we create?" she asked. "It's been done already." "Do it again," said Waldo, "and again, and again." Before he could finish the sentence, she had kissed him. She declared afterwards that he was the first man she had ever kissed, and he declared that she was the first woman who had ever kissed him in the mall. So they both secured a record of a kind. Within the next day or two, a new departure was noticeable in suffragette tactics. They gave up worrying ministers and Parliament, and took to worrying their own sympathizers and supporters for funds. The ballot box was temporarily forgotten in the cult of collecting box. The daughters of the horse leech were not more persistent in their demands. The financiers of tottering ancient regime were not more desperate in their expedients for raising money than the suffragette workers of all sections at this juncture. And in one way or in another, by fair means and normal, they really got together a very useful sum. What they were going to do with it, no one seems to know, not even those who were most active in collecting work. The secret on this occasion had been well kept. Certain transactions that leaked out from time to time only added to the mystery of the situation. "Don't you long to know what we are going to do with our treasure hoard?" Lena asked the Prime Minister one day, when she happened to sit next to him at a whilst drive at the Chinese embassy. "I was hoping you're going to try a little personal bribery," he responded banteringly, but some genuine anxiety and curiosity laid behind the lightness of his chaff. "Course I know," he added, "that you've been buying up building sites in commanding situations and around the metropolis 2 or 3, I'm told, are in the road to Brighton, and another near Ascot. You don't mean to fortify them, do you?" "Oh, something more insidious than that," she said. "You could prevent us from building forts. You can't prevent us from erecting an exact replica of the Victoria Memorial on each of those sites. They're all private property with no building restrictions attached." "Which memorial?" he asked. "Not the one in front of Buckingham Palace. Surely not that one." "That one," she said. "Dear lady," he cried, "you can't be serious. It's a beautiful and imposing work of art. At any rate, one is getting accustomed to it, and even if one doesn't happen to admire it, one can always look in another direction. But imagine what life would be like if one saw that erection confronting one whenever one went. Imagine the effect on people with tired, harassed nerves who saw it 3 times on the way to Brighton, 3 times on the way back. Imagine seeing it dominating the landscape at Ascot, and trying to keep your eyes off it on the Sandwich golf links. What have your countrymen done to deserve such a thing?" "They have refused us the vote," said Lena bitterly. The Prime Minister always declared himself an opponent of anything savouring of panic legislation, but he brought a bill into Parliament forthwith and successfully appealed to both the House to pass it through all its stages within the week. And that's how we got one of the most glorious measures of the century." "A measure conferring the vote on women?" asked the nephew. "Oh, dear, no. An act which made it a penal offence to erect commemoratory statuary anywhere within 3 miles of a public highway." So quoth this raven. "Sorry, I'm feeling a lot better. I just still have that croaky voice, which I thought I'd lend to an Edwardian stuffed shirt. I hope you enjoy it. Saki's kind of a patron saint of this channel. The ones that I've done of him, and not my favorite ones, but just different ones that were still good, have been my highest viewed. So I thought it was time for another Saki, and I'm rambling again. I'm very sorry, my darlings. I hope you have a lovely day and a wonderful weekend, assuming this is going up near the weekend. Bye-bye. Thank you for stopping by, my darlings. It means so much. I so enjoy telling these stories for you. And here are some of my marvelous supporters. Please, if you haven't subscribed, consider doing so. If you give this video a like, it would help me out ever so much. Thank you, and have a lovely, lovely day.